All right, everyone. I apologize for that. I don't know what it is. You plan to start these things on time, and you always end up starting late or a few minutes late. But it's just a matter of getting everything together. And there we are. Okay, let me make sure I can see myself on YouTube. This computer decided that it wanted to update itself this morning, and it's a little finicky sometimes. It's probably time for me to invest in another one. Okay, there is the live icon. There is everything's filling in there. There's the ad. And I'm waiting for myself to appear, and there I am. All right, please smash that like button if you haven't. Yeah, let me know who's there when you start coming in. I have a guest tonight. We're going to talk about homeschooling. I'm going to start. You guys know my style. I'm going to play the intro, and then I'm going to tell you where the idea for the stream came from. And then I'm going to read over something background, and then I'm going to bring my guest in, and we're going to talk about this homeschooling thing. Let me make sure this is still looking good. Raheem Gaines, thank you for being there. I appreciate the support on all fronts. Okay, I'm going to play my intro, and then I'm going to get started because I don't want to keep me and my guest in cyberspace all night long. So different worlds. Let's start with that. Because of where I come from, see, in this world, we're all living in different worlds, and not everybody is privy to the same information. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for this second discussion on this controversial but important topic. Do either of you have any parting words?
I do. And it's just thank you for having us. I really appreciate it. You ask questions in such a way that I don't know what your perspective is. I think as a host, that's exactly perfect. It's difficult, but you get more on the table from guests if you're not the story. And I really, really appreciate talking to you.
All right. I appreciate that.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Anwar.
Because of where I come from, see, in this world, we're all living in different worlds, and not everybody is privy to the same information. All right, everyone. Good evening. Welcome back to Big Discussions 76, my original channel. You guys know who I am. My name is Dr. Anwar Yusuf Dunbar, and this is my original channel. And on this original channel, what I have geared it up to do is to utilize more of a podcast talk show format where I talk with authors and subject matter experts. And when I'm not doing that, I will talk about something that's germane to what's happening in society today, or even in these digital spaces. So I want to thank everyone who that Dr. Tiasan Johnson interview got a large turnout, which is to be expected because it was Dr. Tiasan Johnson. Unfortunately, I can't have Dr. Tiasan Johnson every week, but my goal is to have a new and interesting topic and guest to talk about and talk with every week. So whoever comes in, please smash that like button. If you want to make a donation to the channel, my Cash App and PayPal are here, and the Super Chat is live. And if you're watching on the playback, you can always leave a super thanks if the spirit moves you. So tonight we're going to talk about homeschooling, and this homeschooling revolution. I'll call it a revolution that's going on. So let's start with this. Where did this stream come from? Well, the stream came from three places. The first inspiration came from Erica Williams from the Classy Climb channel. And she presented this on her community tab. And this is this is one of the first things that kind of poked me on the shoulder and said, hey, you should talk about this. And this is worth covering. So Erica posted this on her community tab about 2 weeks ago. And this says, homeschooling has become America's fastest growing form of education. If you look at that figure there, the x-axis is tracking time, and the y-axis is tracking the percent participation in each type of school. So if you look at that red line, the homeschooling has spiked up starting around, it hit its apex during COVID, which was not to be expected as all kids were forced to do some schooling at home. But that was doing school, tuning into public school. Okay. I think what we're talking about tonight is actually parents actually schooling their children at home. And as you can see, that started trending from the time they started measuring this. It started trending upwards around 2017 and 2018. So there was a bit of a split there. Okay, that was one form of inspiration for this stream. The second inspiration came from something I saw here on YouTube over on my Science and Technology channel. Those of you who follow me over there, if you're not following me over there, please do. But one of the things I've become fascinated over there with is climate. And so I do watch the Tom Nelson channel. I guess he would fall under the, this is going to get controversial, the Climate Denier Club. Okay, that's a whole separate discussion. I'm not going to get into all that. But he had a guest on named Sharon. I can't think of her name right now. But anyway, it was about homeschooling, and the reason she was interested, she came at it from a science angle, and she was, herself and others are concerned that science is not being taught properly in the public school system. And so kids aren't being taught how to think. They're not being taught how to come up with their own ideas and test their ideas. But the concern is that they're also being fed specific narratives and ideas. They're being indoctrinated. So that's what that stream was about. That's what that broadcast was about. And that day, I actually learned that there is, this is going to be controversial as well, there is a carbon dioxide. There is a carbon dioxide learning center. This is the other thing they talked about in that discussion. So there's a whole foundation and there's a whole group now there to teach that carbon dioxide isn't bad, but that it actually is good. Okay. So, but that was all about homeschooling. And then the other inspiration is just the fact that it's an election year. Next year is going to be an election year. And I think that it's important to understand what the politicians are talking about. And it's important to understand the actual issues facing the country. And from what I'm seeing, education is a major issue in the country, in our country going forward. The other thing that got me thinking about this, and me and Katy are going to talk about this, we're both Western New Yorkers. I think the first time I started thinking about education and quality of education was when someone handed me this book by Dr. Thomas Sowell, who was a controversial person himself. A lot of people don't like Dr. Thomas Sowell for various reasons, but he wrote this book here called Inside American Education. And I read that during graduate school as I was doing my research. And one of the basic ideas of the book was that American schools, the public schools, need to get back to teaching the basics of reading and writing and teaching less dogma, less social dogma. Now, at that time, I didn't know what social dogma was, but I think we all know what that is now. So at some point, schools started getting away from teaching the basics. Well, one theory, one hypothesis, one viewpoint is that schools got away from teaching the basics of reading and writing and reading, writing, and doing mathematics, reading, writing, and math. Schools got away from those basics, and then they got into the business of teaching social dogma and indoctrinating students that's what also kind of got me interested in this. So why does this matter? Well, I don't have any children right now. I'm going to be honest about that. But I care about the country. I care about where things are going. And I've heard numerous reports that the United States has fallen behind the other countries in terms of overall education, but also as a STEM practitioner and a scientist myself, the United States has fallen behind in the sciences and the maths. So I did do some brief research earlier today. Let's see, I'm at 10 minutes. I want to sprint through this so as not to keep my guest waiting. But I did pull this link, and it's below underneath this stream. This is entitled U.S. Education Rankings Are Falling Behind the Rest of the World. Okay, I'm not going to read this verbatim, but I'm going to read these key takeaways here. The United States placed 11th out of 79 countries in science when testing was last administered in 2018. The top 5 math scoring countries in 2018 were all in Asia. The United States students' math scores have remained steady since 2003. Their science scores have been about the same since 2006. So pretty much no progress has been made. The IMD World Competitiveness Center reports that the U.S. ranked 10th in its 2020 competitiveness report after ranking first in 2018. Okay, the U.S. scored 478 in math, below the OECD average of 489. That's well below the scores of the top 5, all which were in Asia. Singapore scored 569. Macau scored 555. Hong Kong scored 551. Taiwan scored 531. And Japan scored 527. And then I'll read this one as well. The United States scored 502 in science, which was above the OECD average of 489. The top 5 highest scorers in science were Singapore at 551, Macau at 544, Estonia at 530, Japan at 529, and Finland at 522. Okay, so now that I've read that, I was going to read the second piece, but I don't want to keep my guest waiting, and I want to respect her time, and I want to respect my time. So I'll cover that in probably a follow-up stream. But what I will say is this: I hope folks watch this. I hope some more folks come in, and if they don't, I hope folks watch the replay on this. My intro was with Dr. Anthony Davies and James R. Harrigan, and I remember I'm going to keep saying this over and over again before I bring my guest up and in subsequent streams. Thanksgiving is next week, and my mom, when I was at home in Buffalo recently, I was watching the Words and Numbers podcast, and that has a still shot of James and Anthony. They're both two middle-aged white gentlemen, and my mother came in. Thanksgiving is next week, so all of us will be sitting around the table talking about things, or those of us who celebrate that will. And my mother asked, I told her, this is the Words and Numbers podcast, and these guys have some very, very valuable information regarding politics and current events. And my mother asked the question, are they white? Okay, what color are they? Well, that matters. Color matters, well, for a lot of people, but specifically for the Black boomers. And so what I want to say is, regarding this channel and just in general, there's a lot we can learn from each other, no matter which color we are. All right. And there's a lot we can learn from people online, people behind avatars. All right. There's a lot we can learn from others. So my guests going forward for this channel, my plan for my guests is I plan to have guests from all walks of life. So I hope that my current subscribers would tune in and learn something regardless of which walk of life that other person or that guest comes from. So with that, everyone, I'm going to bring up my guest, Katy Barrett. She is homeschooling her kids right now, and we were put in touch by the Counselor's Corner. David Glover, well, actually Herbert Lewis put me in touch with Katy, so she agreed to come on and talk about homeschooling, and that's what we're going to talk about. So that second link, again, I'm going to cover that in a subsequent piece, but I want to respect Katy's time and my own because we both have things to do in the morning. So with that, everyone, I'm going to bring up Katy Barrett, and we're going to talk about homeschooling.
Hello.
Good evening, Katy.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Well, first of all, yeah, thank you for your willingness to come and talk about this. This is a novel topic. This is something that we're seeing. It looks like we're seeing an increased trend of in this country, and with you being kind of on the front lines, this is very, very valuable. So, and Herb, if you're out there, thank you for putting me in touch with Katy. So I have a bunch of questions here. So let's jump right in. I want to respect your time and my own. All right. So Katy, let's go from the beginning. Where are you from? I know where you're from, but I want to do this for completeness and transparency.
I grew up in Niagara Falls, New York. I currently live in Syracuse.
Okay. So you are a Western New Yorker.
I am.
I'm from Buffalo myself. Did you attend LaSalle, Niagara Falls, or Niagara Catholic?
Niagara Falls.
Okay, so the Power Cats. Okay.
Yep.
What were so if you were in Herb's age group, well, I'm just behind. That means you were there with guys like Will Cawley and yeah.
I think I'm a few years younger than him.
And Will Cawley. Okay, then Jermaine Bradley and Willie Matthews, and I played some basketball at Hutch Tech, so I know who those guys are. Okay, all right. I've heard about education at LaSalle. What was education at Niagara Falls High School like?
Education at Niagara Falls High School was interesting for me. I went to Catholic school, K-8, and I was very, very happy and excited to leave the tiny little Catholic school and to go to a larger public school. I thought that was very exciting. I often characterize my time at high school as 9th grade. I loved it. 10th grade, I liked it. 11th grade, I disliked it. And 12th grade, I hated it. And I think that's largely because I went through a process of disillusionment while I was in high school, where I came to see people as being shuffled through systems, almost like cattle, and that individuals didn't matter as much as systems. And so that was my experience there. I had a good time. I made a lot of good friends. I think my disillusionment may have happened in any public high school setting. I don't think it was unique to Niagara Falls High School in particular, but those years for me were a process of disillusionment, and specifically related to the education system and how people learn and how people are treated.
So you started recognizing that as a teen?
Yes. When I was 17, I remember becoming very aware of it and it being a very acute experience for me that really colored my viewpoints going forward from that point.
So what gave you awareness of that? Because most high school kids, you're in high school, you're getting ready to go to college, you know what's in your own little bubble, you're dating and you know involved in your activities. What gave you an awareness of that?
I think it was that I tended to be a very idealistic child. I tend to be a very idealistic adult as well. And during the process of high school is when I grew an awareness that the world that I was being prepared for and that all of my peers were being prepared for, in many cases, by some very well-intentioned and loving adults, I ceased to believe in the narratives that I was being taught. And so I came to feel like we were living a lie to some degree. You know, we were being prepared for a world that I could see was rapidly changing. The way that I had been taught through both Catholic schools and public schools, and even by my parents and by the media and society as well. We didn't talk about the wars that we were in very honestly. We didn't talk about foreign policy. We didn't talk about what happened with our tax money. We didn't talk about class in the United States. We often don't talk about class. And so I came to see these things as that society was sort of a veneer of polite lies. And that was very disheartening to me because I had believed a lot of those lies. And then when I came to begin to question them and doubt them and think, I don't think that this paradigm of the world that I've been handed is accurate. I took it very personally. It was a really emotional thing for me where I wasn't sure what to believe, but I was very skeptical of official narratives. I had a very big chip on my shoulder about money. Niagara Falls is quite poor. And so growing up and seeing that sort of poverty close up and then realizing that that wasn't the experience of the entire world and that not everybody was seeing that and that it was something that seemed to be unspoken and ignored. That meant a lot to me at that time. That was a very personal revelation I was upset about. So I had a chip on my shoulder there. And I think largely just it was a process of disillusionment, which I've been through that cycle of disillusionment probably many more times in my life since then. But right around 17 is the first time that I remember becoming aware of this juxtaposition between what I was observing in my own real life and with real people and in the city where I lived, compared to the narratives that I felt like I had grown up being told were true, and seeing that those things weren't aligning for me.
Okay, let's stay here for a minute because you mentioned that Niagara Falls was poor.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of home did you come from? Was it two parents where your folks watched the news every night? Because the reason I'm asking this is because oftentimes the home we come from shapes that perception. And for the home I came from, it was my mother and her siblings, they're Black baby boomers, so they saw the world through the lens of racism and racism against Black people, and Democrats good, Republicans bad, Republicans are warmongers. And I kind of started seeing the world through that lens. Mm-hmm. But what lens did your lens come from? Your home, or was it
there was a big disillusionment coming out into the world, and I think it's because I was very naive. I come from a two-parent household. I'm the oldest of 6 girls. We're Catholic. We all attended Catholic school up through about 8th grade. And then I went away to went to public school. And I think that I had this idea of the world that it was a very benign and loving place. And so seeing that wasn't true for everybody else made me really start to question what I thought was true versus what I observed to be true. Before observing in the world, I wouldn't have really imagined that people could have bad parents or that kids could not have enough food or, these sorts of things that I was just very protected from because I was in a very sheltered childhood. Although we didn't have a lot of money, we had a really strong family unit, and I have a big extended family. So I had a big loving family, and the idea that, there would be people in the world that would have no place to go and end up homeless. That was kind of a shock to me. Like, well, why wouldn't they have a place to go? Why wouldn't they be taken care of? So I think those things felt very personal to me because of the difference between the naivety and the stories from the Bible and the stories from the Catholic Church that sounded so beautiful about how the world worked and caring for each other and taking care of each other and charity and then seeing that in the real world. There were a whole lot of problems that weren't solved by a sermon or a story or a narrative.
Okay, I'm going to read this comment here from Miss KP Bailey. Thank you, Miss KP Bailey. She says, "Hello, Dr. Dunbar and Miss Barrett. I pulled my little ones from public school, so I'll definitely have to catch the replay." Okay, I guess she had to leave. I'd be curious to see why she pulled her kids from public school. And then Michael Ross, I think this is a question I was just thinking. He asks, what were the racial demographics of Niagara Falls High School?
You know, I can't tell you that for certain, but I believe that I remember that they were somewhere around 60-40 white, black, 60% white, 40% black. I can't say that that's accurate, but that's the number that's dancing around in my head at this point in time.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you one more question in this space, Katie, then we'll move on. I mean, certainly when you change types of schools, you can see the difference because, I mean, you're there, so you see the difference in the teachers, the building, the classmates, everything. What made you change from private school to public school?
The private school felt very, very small to me. It was a very small private school, and I felt like there was not a lot of space for me to develop as an individual because I had a very giant Irish Catholic family, and everybody knew me as having this role within my larger family structure. So I was really looking forward to branching out and being in a bigger environment where I could play with identity, I suppose, and not be pigeonholed into a role that felt like I had been pigeonholed into that role from kindergarten on.
Okay, so you wanted something different.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay. So you attended Niagara Falls High School. Let's transition to college. Where did you go?
All over the place. First, I went to SUNY Fredonia. I went there for 2 years. Then I wanted to transfer, and my younger sister was graduating from Niagara Falls High School in 1996. I had graduated in 94. She wanted to go to a small, tiny private college in Prescott, Arizona, which had a very non-traditional curriculum, I suppose. They go kayaking and they climb mountains and they do all sorts of stuff. So she applied there, and so did I. And she went out there, and I transferred out there after 2 years. At that place, they had a couple majors that were already like well defined for you, but one of the quirks about this school is that you got to design your own major if they didn't have a major already laid out for you. So I tried to combine their wilderness studies with early childhood education, although I didn't even know that was a phrase or a field at that time, but I knew I liked to work with young kids. And after a semester of trying to design my own coursework, I was like, you can't adapt things like kayaking down the Grand Canyon to toddlers. You know, you just don't take toddlers to do that stuff because it's not safe. So I realized that the things I was trying to put together to make my own major just really were not coming together. So I ended up going on a road trip for about 3 months with my high school boyfriend, actually, because we were still together then, even though it was a couple years into college. We visited a whole bunch of states and a whole bunch of colleges, and I found a little college in Kansas that had an early childhood education major, and I thought that looked really interesting. So I transferred there. I finished college there. That I think that was like 2 more years. At that point, I had met my husband and got engaged. We moved back out to Prescott, Arizona together for a year because my sister still lived out there, and we had some mutual friends and stuff out there. Lived there for a year, just working. Moved back to Niagara Falls, got married, stayed in the Falls for a couple years, and then we moved to SUNY Oswego, where both my husband and I did our graduate degrees for education in New York State. And then from Oswego down to Syracuse, and I've been in Syracuse since.
Okay, so my father is a retired educator, so I know that in New York State you have to have your master's in order to teach.
Yes.
Okay.
Or you have a few years after your bachelor's where you can teach, but
years.
you have to be like actively working on it at that point.
Yes, and if you don't, you will get booted, right? I've seen that happen too. Everyone, continue commenting in the chat. This is a big issue on a number of fronts. This issue very much impacts the future of the country. I mean, we have the election next year, but it's important to be able to understand what's going on. And it seems there's an increased trend in homeschooling. Okay, we talked about this in the lead up to this discussion. What were you taught at the college level in terms of teaching? Because you didn't sound too encouraged about what you were taught there in terms of what your students would be taught.
Mhm. I learned some really amazing things in my undergrad, especially in my early childhood special education program. However, all of my education courses, my professors were, maybe discouraging is the word, about what to expect when you got out of college and got a job in the public school system. And they were very, very direct with us that we are here to teach you about how kids learn. We're here to teach you how to create engaging lessons. We're here to teach you how to create rich environments. And we're here to teach you how to be great teachers. But when you get out into the real world, a lot of your time and energy will be spent doing things that have absolutely nothing to do with how kids learn, or being a better teacher, or doing your best in terms of helping kids to actually learn and grow. A lot of your time and energy will be spent dealing with administrative jargon, and your best bet is not to try and be the greatest teacher ever, or have the best environment, or even really change things. Your best bet is to learn to code switch. And so when your administrator comes knocking on the door, you need to be able to use the jargon to get them off your back. And then when they leave, you can try to do the best you can for kids within the confines of the system.
Okay, that was a lot. So does that, geez, what does that mean? Does that mean that teaching the kids is not the most important thing, or there's just so much bureaucracy and extra administrative stuff that a teacher has to deal with, that all that ends up getting in the way of actually teaching the students?
Yes, I think the latter. My professors were not cynical necessarily. They really wanted to teach us how to do a good job at being teachers. They had a sincere desire to help us, but they were very realistic about what to expect when we got into the school systems, and that the overall structure of education in this country would not be aligned with the things we were learning about how to be good teachers, and that we needed to be prepared to walk that line between being good at our profession and managing the expectations of the bureaucracy.
Okay, so you said preparing engaging lessons for the novice, for the layperson. Don't you all have standards that you're supposed to address, or are the lessons given to you by the state and the county, or are you given a set of standards to build your
It
lessons around?
it really depends on the district. I would say on a statewide level, you're given a list of standards and objectives to meet, and then it's up to you how you meet them. However, different districts may buy into certain curriculum packages, and then they'll want you to use that curriculum package. They may provide you with certain textbooks, and they want you to use those textbooks. I know at one point in the Syracuse City School District, they were trying to standardize the script that the teachers used across grade levels at different buildings, so that if a kid ended up transferring schools in the middle of the year, it would be a seamless transition, because they were getting the same lessons at the different districts on the same day, and they really wanted to kind of standardize that. Now, I don't know how far they got with that or how successful it was, but there's definitely been a push towards greater centralization and standardization in education in the past decade, especially with the No Child Left Behind and the increase in testing and that sort of thing. So I would say it depends on where you work, and it depends on the administrators you work under, how exactly they implement that. Oh, I can't hear you.
My neighbor was doing some work next door, so I muted myself. In our earlier talk, in our pre-talk, I think you talked about how curiosity and creative thought were not being taught. I think you witnessed that with your kids. Were you seeing that when you were in college? Were they encouraging you all to pull that out of students, or was it just more of a cookie cutter Prussian education system type thing?
My recollection, my best program was my early childhood program. I studied education at the different schools that I went to, so I took some different classes in different places. I studied physical education also in college, so I had that PE background. My early childhood special education program was hands down the best program. They really cared about how kids learn, but they also pointed out that early childhood, there's still more freedom to run a classroom in a way that is responsive to how children learn. And it's more accepted that children learn through play in the younger grades than as they get older. So I think when I was in college, it was really that dichotomy where they were constantly warning us that it would be great for us to draw this creativity out of children, but you got to fill out the paperwork and you got to make sure the lesson plans are done the correct way, and you got to make sure you can use the right jargon to satisfy the administrators. So it was always like, yes, that's what we want to be doing. It was almost like they took it for granted that that's what we wanted to be doing, and that's why we were there. But there was the constant warning of like, you're only gonna be able to do so much of that because of these demands of the behemoth of the system. So, pick your battles, walk that line. It was very much an awareness of the reality of the situation that was tempering any sort of real enthusiasm for what might be possible.
Okay, so I read some numbers in that link regarding how the United States is doing versus other countries. It looks like the Asian countries are leading in a lot of education metrics.
Mm-hmm.
From your experience teaching in the public school system, what things were good about it? What things were not so good? Or were there any good things about it?
The good things about it is that I think that most teachers genuinely like kids and want to be around kids and help them learn. There were some teachers that I wasn't crazy about, or I, didn't think were the best, but largely speaking, the teachers were enthusiastic. They were positive. They were caring people. So that would be a positive. And that was true of the administrators too. The negative was that it really was a tremendous amount of time spent, crossing T's and dotting I's, and a lot of energy spent doing that. And so the limits of the imagination of what you could do, of what might be possible, were weighed down with the demands of the system to a degree that, it just felt like the creativity was maybe 10% and 90% of the job was the demands of the system.
Okay. I want to thank Chris for the generous Cash App donation. Thank you very much. So certainly having the right teachers can make a big difference in your life going forward. And so it's a very, very important job. And from what I'm hearing, there are there's a high attrition rate today. But what in the district you were in, what were the parents like? Did you have a good parent involvement? Because I'm seeing that makes a huge difference as well.
Mm-hmm. I moved around to a lot of different districts. I worked in a lot of early childhood programs that were designed to help families in poverty. I did see parents were involved there. That was contrary to the stereotypes that I had learned about parents in poverty, but I saw that they really were involved and that they cared a lot about their kids and that they showed up and they wanted to be involved. And then I did work in a more middle class district where I did special education. Largely speaking, I got along with those parents too when they were involved. I had a lot of respect for parents as a teacher. I tried to be very open to include them. I felt that there were some structural barriers, and sometimes teachers don't necessarily feel comfortable inviting parents into the classroom or making it welcoming. That's almost like an afterthought because of everything they have to manage with the kids. But because my background was in early childhood and I was trained that we were inviting the parents and including the parents was a very important part of what we did, and that mattered. I came in with the idea that I wanted to connect with parents, and I had largely good relationships with parents in my classroom, and they did want to be involved. I think parents can be more involved than they are in the school districts. That's largely going to be structural changes, but in terms of their interest and their willingness to show up, I think that was there. I witnessed that being there.
Now, Katie, when you say structural changes, what are you referring to?
Well, the way that the schools are structured is that they largely, I mean, we have an economy where most families have both parents at work all day. In many cases, the school district is acting as a childcare provider for those parents to be at work. Sometimes they're doing it also in the morning. I've had jobs at school districts where before I really became a teacher and I was like in college still, I had a lot of jobs where I did the before and after school care. So I've shown up at school district buildings at 6 o'clock in the morning, and kids were getting dropped off at 6 in the morning, and then they had their full school day, and then I came back and stayed there from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. So kids are spending a tremendous amount of time at school, but it's largely while their parents are at work. And so inviting the parents into the school and including them in things is challenging due to that's what I mean by structural. Also, when you put a tremendous amount of time into test preparation and the sort of very focused academics that are looking at being measured on large scale assessments, things like field trips, things like hands-on activities, things like putting together a fun day where maybe the parents could come in and participate with the kids, they become harder to work into the time that you have, and you become very focused on getting these numbers up for the tests or spending enough time on the test prep. So I know that in the time that I was in education, I heard a lot of teachers complain about not having enough time for field trips, not having enough time for community building events, things that would pull the parents in. You know, when I was a kid, I remember going on field trips, and you would ride to the field trip with your classmate's mom and they would watch you throughout the time you were there, and then you'd ride back to the school with them. And so it was structurally, there was one parent at home more often. People had the time, and the schools weren't so overloaded with test prep and that sort of thing. So there were more opportunities to do things like hands-on learning and field trips.
Yeah, so there were a couple of things there. I remember that as well. I remember going on field trips and parents coming along, and I remember that. And I think it depends on which district you're in too, right? Because if you're in a more affluent district, those parents have more disposable income to spend on
Yes.
tutors,
Yeah.
and they have more time. And actually, well, I won't say more interest, but they have more flexibility to participate.
And they may also feel more comfortable coming into a school building because, you know, the difference for me in working in more affluent districts and working in districts with higher poverty is that a lot of the time when you are a student or a parent of a child in a district in high poverty, there's a tendency to where the families, I don't want to say they're criminalized, but you know, my son goes to an inner city high school in Syracuse. My oldest son goes to public school now by choice. My two younger still homeschool. And when I go to pick him up from school, I have to go through a metal detector and have my purse searched. So that is not a deterrent to me personally. If I want to be there, I'm going to go there, but it's not a comfortable, you know, it doesn't make me feel welcome when I walk in and they're like, go through the metal detector, give me your purse, let me search through it. And so that experience is going to be very different if that's been your experience of school when you went to school as a kid and now as a parent versus somebody who had a much more positive experience in school and does not experience their school environment as being criminalized in any way.
Okay, we're going to move on to the homeschooling, but I just thought of this one. Do you find that children of educated parents tend to do better in school than children of non-educated parents, or is there any correlation?
Oh yeah, I'm sure there is. It seems obvious to me that there would be, because you learn to navigate systems. You learn to, you know, you become familiar with certain vocabulary and certain ways of navigating systems that is easier and more comfortable when you have access to the type of information and resources that are designed for you to navigate those systems smoothly.
Okay. Being on the being an educator yourself, when did you start hearing about homeschooling?
I think when my oldest son was born in 2008, and for several years before he was born and the first several years after he was born, I was an avid reader of what was called mommy blogs. And these were blogs that women from all over the country began to write their stories of motherhood on the internet and share them. Oftentimes, with not necessarily photos or fake names for their kids or what have you, but they were sharing their real stories. And so I read a lot of those. I remember at one point I had like 72 tabs that I would hit open all, and all 72 tabs would open. It was like all my mommy blogs. And I would see who had updated each day and read whoever updated. And so that, I think that may have been where I really began to become aware of homeschooling, because some of the bloggers that I read were homeschoolers.
Okay. Now let's jump ahead. What made you decide, and other parents that what made you decide to start homeschooling your children?
When my oldest son was 3, I sent him to preschool. At that time, I was a stay-at-home mom. I had my 3-year-old son, and I had a daughter who was a newborn. She was like 6 months old. And I was also babysitting 2 other kids because I had gotten laid off from my job right after I had my daughter. And I decided that it was a part-time job, and I didn't want to go to full-time when my kids were young. I wasn't sure how easy it would be to find another part-time job. Those could be a little tricky to find at that time. And so I decided to babysit. And so I started babysitting these other 2 little kids. And then when my son turned 3, he started to express some interest in preschool, which probably because I would talk about preschool because I had been a preschool teacher and I liked it. And he said, I want to try this. So I said, okay. So I called around and I found a local preschool that had some space, and I signed him up, and I began taking him to preschool. And after he went there for a few days, he came home and said, Mommy, they do the same stuff there that we do here. And I have friends here to play with that you're babysitting. So why do I need to go to this place to do the same stuff that we're doing at home? And I was like, that's a really good point. We are doing all the same stuff at home. I'm a preschool teacher. I know how to do these activities with you. So I had already paid for the whole month. So I was like, I want you to keep going for this month, and because I paid for it, and then see what you feel like at the end of the month. But if at the end of the month you feel like you'd rather not go anymore, I won't make you go back, because I think that you're right. We don't have to go to school to do these things. So he went for the rest of the month. I said, you want to go back? He said, no. I said, okay. And I started keeping him at home. And then I was babysitting these 2 kids, and I really liked the work. I liked babysitting. I liked being with young kids, but the hours of childcare are brutal. It was like 7 a.m. till 5 p.m, and you never get a lunch, and you never get a break, and there's nobody else there to help you ever. And when you're going to the bathroom, you're like listening for somebody crying. It's just, the hours are brutal. And so I was looking at my options, and I discovered that in New York State, I was allowed to babysit 2 kids without having to become a licensed family home daycare. It's called legally exempt childcare. You cannot take more than 2 kids plus your own, but as long as you keep it at that number, you're exempt from any other government regulations. So that was how I did my childcare, because I didn't want to open a big daycare. Then I discovered that preschool is also legally exempt in New York State, as long as your program is less than 3 hours a day. So I thought, well, what if instead of babysitting for 10 hours a day, I just ran a program for 2.5 hours a day, took a lot more kids, charged a little more per hour, and then I'd only have to work a couple mornings a week instead of having to work these 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. days. So then I decided to open a home nursery school. And I did that. And then once I was doing that, it was like homeschooling and entrepreneurship kind of went together for me. Like, since I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to do this for my kids and other people's kids type of thing. And so that all came together and worked synergistically, really. And I ended up doing both.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that works and which model you all adopted and how it's different than
Sure.
public school model?
So when I studied education, I was always taken by what I'm going to call like the alternative education approaches like Montessori. All the early childhood people know Montessori. Waldorf has some really cool things. Most people know that word. There's also one out of Italy called Reggio Emilia, and it's widely considered to be one of the best early childhood approaches to education in the world. It came out of post-World War II Italy, and the people who got together to create this movement were asking themselves, how can we educate and approach young children in such a way that we will create a world that will not lead to fascism? And so they really ask themselves questions about how kids learn, how community is built, how meaning is built among stories. And they came up with this approach where you are really co-creating the curriculum with the children based on their interests. So rather than coming in with a canned curriculum saying, this is what every kid is going to learn, it's a relationship, and you're seeing what the kids are interested in, and then you're providing opportunities for them to further those interests. And then you're observing how they interact with that, and what you see them learning there, and jumping off from that point. So it's a real back and forth, a real give and take between the teachers and the students. And I really liked that. I thought it was a very novel approach. I thought it was really impressive. I read a bunch about it. I remember that year for my Christmas list, I had like 10 different books all about Reggio Emilia on my Christmas list. Gave that to my family. I was like, this is all I want. There's a Reggio Emilia inspired school in Toronto. So I contacted the owner of that school and I asked if I could come and tour it. Drove up to Toronto and spent the day there. She was so kind to me. She toured me all around her schools. She was an author as well. She gave me some free copies of the books that she had published. She was just very, very kind and very open with me, very helpful. And I decided to open a nursery school based on that approach out of my home. And so it was a Reggio Emilia inspired home nursery school. And I ran that for, I want to say it was about 8 years.
Okay. I was just thinking about what you said in terms of co-creating the curriculum with the children. How big was your group? Because I imagine with a group that's too big, you probably can't do that, right?
No, not unless you have enough of adults. I usually was willing to take about 6 students plus my own kids. At certain points I had 2, and at certain points I had 3, depending on, because I had a kid during that span, my youngest baby. So my classes, my groups were usually around 8, maybe 9 kids. And the one year that when I had my youngest child, I was going to reopen my nursery school. He was born in April, and I was going to reopen my nursery school in September. And I was like, I don't think I can do this by myself with a baby. So a friend of mine who had a background in early childhood education, she had also just had a baby, let me run it that year. And that year we had 12 kids, but we had 2 teachers. So, and that was really fun. I loved working with another adult, but my 12 kids in my house was really loud. So after that year, I was like, I'm going back down to 6 because it was a little much with the 12. And it was a bad winter that year too, loud. But yeah, so I didn't have a very big group. I kept it small.
Okay. So the advantage of this Reggio Emilia model is, again, you can co-create the curriculum with the children, with the students. So it sounds like it's less cookie cutter than the public school model. Okay. Now, would you say that that's one of the drawbacks of the public school model, is that it's so cookie cutter and it's so
yes, it's centralized and it's standardized, and I do think that that's a disadvantage, even though a lot of times in educational discussions on the federal level they'll paint that as a good thing, but I think that it's better when you can individualize learning.
Okay, I want to acknowledge the controversial counselor from Niagara Falls, David. Thank you for stopping through. Okay, I think this is a good place to add this extra one in. I mean, because this goes with building your own curriculum. One of the a lot of us have read the Rich Dad Poor Dad books by Robert Kiyosaki, and one of his criticisms of the public school model is that they don't teach any financial education. So kids are taught just to be employees. They're not taught how to start businesses or become entrepreneurs, or even to think creatively.
Yeah.
And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, okay, not realistically, not everyone in society can become a business owner because someone has to work. Someone has to be the employee. But I do see something to the whole creativity piece and learning how to manage money. Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you all added things to your curriculum that the public school system doesn't in these areas?
Being an entrepreneur was such a life-changing experience for me. Babysitting, maybe not so much, because I'd been a babysitter for years and I didn't really consider that to be like a real entrepreneur per se. There were a lot of things that you would normally do if you open a business that if you're just babysitting a couple kids, you don't necessarily have to do. But once I opened my nursery school, that was so eye-opening to me. I learned so much, and I really, truly just love entrepreneurship. I'm a huge, huge proponent of entrepreneurship. I currently own my second business. I've got like 3 more businesses in my mind that I'm developing and planning, and working with people on. And so entrepreneurship was really important to me right from the start. I wanted my kids to see what I was doing and how much I loved it and how much joy it brought me, and that it can be used to help support a family. And so I always let my kids do, things, entrepreneurial type of things. They used to go down to the corner and set up a lemonade stand. So I would go down there and I would help them make signs for their lemonade stand and carry the stuff down there and help them do that. My son at one point came to me and told me that he wanted to walk around door to door in our neighborhood and try to sell his old stuffed animals. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about this, but I could tell that it meant a lot to him and that he was highly motivated. And so I let him do that, albeit myself or his dad walking behind him and kind of keeping an eye on him to make sure he was safe. But my kids made homemade slime, and then I helped them to advertise it on Facebook and find people that would come buy their homemade slime. We sold a whole bunch of homemade slime to another school teacher who was really encouraging to my daughter, who was only like 5 or 6 at the time, and selling her slime. I helped my daughter make an Etsy shop and sell jewelry. She's been in multiple craft fairs and sold her crocheting. So yeah, I've really been helping my kids try to be entrepreneurs from the time they were quite young. And the homeschool program that I currently run, not the same nursery school I used to do, this is a different one for older kids. We do a 2-week business fair in June where we have 2 weeks of classes preparing the kids and talking about profits and losses and talking about cost of materials and talking about cost of time and marketing and looking at what you think is going to be successful and sell and how to set prices and all sorts of stuff. And then at the end of that 2-week workshop, we do a Saturday event where the kids we rent space from a church. So we use the church's cafeteria and their parking lot to set up tables. We let the kids design flyers on Canva, and then we print off the flyers and we hang them around locally. The church helps advertise it to their parishioners. We hang it in the library nearby. So we get people from the community as well as people from our own little homeschool group that come and buy the things that the kids decide to sell. So my daughter's been in several of them, and my youngest son just did his first one last June. He made walking tacos, where you open a little bag of chips and then you scoop some meat in there, you scoop some guacamole in there, you put a little lettuce in there, and you eat it right out of the bag of chips. And so he was really excited about that. He made a little logo of a taco with legs for walking tacos. And we will be doing a holiday craft fair at the end of this month. And my daughter is right now crocheting tons of Christmas ornaments to sell at the holiday craft fair because she really likes to crochet. So yeah, that's a big part of homeschooling for me, is that I wanted my kids to see that there are options other than being employees, and that even if you do something small, even if it's just a side hustle, it doesn't have to start off as being, people think of businesses as like, well, you need $1 million in capital. Like, no, you don't. I opened my nursery school with stuff I already owned, things I could buy along the way at thrift stores, at the Goodwill, And I used free stuff from nature. I went out all the time. I picked up pine cones and then got glue and let the kids make collages out of pine cones. When the flowers lost their petals, I collected them off the ground and brought them to the kids and let them make art with flower petals. If I picked a bouquet of flowers outside, then I set it up as a still life and gave them colored pencils and markers and crayons, and that was their still life to draw. So there are tons and tons of ways to open businesses, even businesses that you might think require a lot of capital, on a smaller scale. Just start little and build it up as you go. And that's a big part of homeschooling for me. I really like that aspect of it.
Okay, interesting. Some people don't get that until they become adults, if at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't. Although it's interesting because my father was an entrepreneur and then he went to work in the public school system, and he wasn't crazy about working in the public school system. And as soon as he retired, he became an entrepreneur again. But his field of interest, he fixes cars and hones engines for boats and stuff. So I didn't have that same skill set as he did. But I think knowing that he and his brothers and his dad had run a business for years probably made me feel more like it was a possibility for me.
Okay. I want to go back to one thing, then we'll move on, and then we'll transition towards the end, because I want to respect your time. So going back to co-creating the curriculum with the students, is that driven by what they want to be in terms of career, and when they grow up, you guys ask them that, or are you just kind of tracking their interests and their talents?
It's their interest in the context of what's being looked at in the, with the kids. So it's really Reggio Emilia is an early childhood approach. Mm-hmm. So they're not really thinking about what you want to be when you grow up yet, because it's really largely geared towards preschoolers. Now, I've pulled that approach, some elements of that approach, into my classroom now, which is 3rd through 6th grade. But it's still really based on what the kids are interested in learning about, related to whatever overarching theme it is that we're studying at the time, rather than what their career interests are. But you see kids have interests that they're in, strengths from a pretty early age. You see kids that are, I remember I bought my kids this thing called Snap Circuits, and it's circuitry. And the circuitry is not a gift of mine. I can follow the directions in the booklet, and if I follow them exactly right, I can make the circuit work. But if I look at the circuit without the booklet, I have absolutely no clue of what's going on there. And so I bought my kids this kit, and I would help them by going along and showing them the directions and stuff. And then I was babysitting for a friend of mine, and her son came over. This kid he didn't even need the book. He just looked at the circuits, and he'd be like, "Oh, here's your problem right over here. Like, connection number 42, you got to do it this way." And I'm like, how do you know that? Just by looking at it. He was only probably, I don't know, 8 years old maybe or something when he did this, 8 to 10. So you see these strengths in kids from an early age a lot of the time, what they're driven by, what they're passionate about, what they're interested in. And you can tell the kids who are really want to understand how things work, and they're going to try to take things apart and figure out how they work. And then you see other kids who could care less about that, and they are so driven by stories. They will remember, every story of every ancient culture that you read aloud, because they're really driven by stories of people and how people connect and things like that. So I think you begin to see those things when they're younger. But in terms of co-creating the curriculum, it's really more open than career paths. It could be abstract thought. It could be physics. It could be social studies. It could be poetry. I mean, it could really be anything.
Okay. Do you see any gender trends at that? Because your age group is what?
3rd through 6th grade. Yeah, the boys are almost always the ones who go in the block center. The boys rebuild. I have a big block center there, and I have a group of boys that are in there. They have rebuilt with wooden blocks, Japanese temples. They made a dragon from Chinese mythology. They made the Taj Mahal. They recreated the city of Shanghai with wooden blocks. And that's almost always the boys. And the girls tend to be much more into the arts and the crafts type of things. They've made dolls and kimonos. They've made washi dolls. They have, they'd like to do the painting. They like to do the drawing and the coloring. So I do see some trends with gender. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Because that's a controversial topic now in the public school system, is that, well, number one, it's actually more well suited for girls. Mm-hmm. And also, they're kind of they've been trying to collapse everything so that everybody's the same and everybody can do this and everybody can do that.
Yeah.
All alike. Do you leave it completely open for the girls to go over there to the block center and they naturally don't want to go? And do you leave it open for the boys to go over to the arts and crafts as well? You leave it open for them and they just naturally gravitate towards those two poles?
Yes. And I wouldn't say it's, it's not 100% because I have a couple girls who really like the block centers.
Yeah.
I've got some boys that are great artists and love to draw. But largely speaking, when I think about the block center, it is most of the time boys. I had some girls who wanted to go over and create something that they had seen the boys create several weeks back. The other day, we had like a free period in the afternoon, and they came and said, "Can we try making a Japanese temple in the block center?" I said, "Yeah, get over there and go for it." And they did a great job. But I think they were inspired by seeing the boys do it. They may not have chosen to do it the first time, but once they saw it and they observed it and they got a feel for what it was all about, then they were into it and they wanted to give it a try. And similarly, there are times when boys will be like, "I don't think I can do that." And then they might watch a girl make a drawing and she's like, "It's not that hard. Look, this is what I did." And then they're like, "All right, let me get that pencil. Let me try it." So I wouldn't say it's a monolith, but there are tendencies for sure.
Right. There are trends.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's silly to pretend there aren't.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of that on the outside. Speaking of which, that's a good transition to this question. Did you let me look at the question. It involves indoctrination.
Mm-hmm.
When you were a teacher yourself and then with your own children and even some of the parents you work with, have you all seen that there are things in the public school that are being kind of pushed on students and that you all don't necessarily agree with in terms of indoctrination?
My feeling was that the indoctrination in the public school system has been present from the very beginning. And so while I do see that there are trends, I haven't seen it on a personal level. I see more talk about it in the media than I see of it happening in the real world. The indoctrination that I see is less modern and recent and more timeless and has been going on for a long time. I think that the idea of like the Prussian factory school approach, there's something to that. It's not the only facet of education, and it's not like that's everybody's motivating factor, but it's a competing interest and was from the very beginning. They said, "You're going to take away these kids who are working in the factories. We don't like that. That's our child labor. We don't have to pay them very much. Don't take them." And that was part of the argument, was like, if we get them into school, we can have them to be more docile and complacent. And then ultimately you're going to get more productive workers out of this. So let us take them. So there was that factor that was there from the start in terms of indoctrination. And if you think about the way that we study history, and I didn't learn until I was an adult how many years America has been at war since it was founded. And it's a tremendous percentage of our history that we've been at war the whole time. We don't learn about war like that in school. We don't learn about how to stop war. We don't learn about how to actively create peace. None of that stuff. I think we're indoctrinated into a culture where we accept violence and we accept coercion and we accept force as being legitimate behaviors of the state in many ways. And I think that type of indoctrination goes back a lot further than the last couple of years. I'm aware of what you're talking about, that there's indoctrination of various sorts in the school, but on a personal level, I haven't witnessed that or participated in that so much that I feel like there's been a more insidious, deeper level of indoctrination that goes back a lot longer. And that was something that I was aware of even as a student that bothered me.
Okay. All right. So we're going to start towards the end now. So earlier offline, we talked about some of the science activities that you have the kids do at your homeschooling program. Do you want to talk about those? Because it sounds like they're getting to do things that they would not do in the public school system.
Yes, I would love to talk about that. So we're studying physics this year, and we come in with a topic, and we stay at that topic as long as we need to. It's usually a month to 6 weeks. So our first topic was speed, velocity, and acceleration, and we talked about them. A lot of the times, I'll use a fairly classic educator technique of I think they call it a KWL chart, where I ask the kids, "What do you know about this topic?" And then I write down what they tell me on the whiteboard. What do you want to know about the topic? And then I write down their questions on the whiteboard. And then at the end, we come back and I ask, what did you learn about this topic? We see if we've answered the questions, point out new things we've learned, new connections we've made. And then I create different centers. And so I usually have a block center because we have a very big shelf of wooden blocks that we got. I'll have a paperwork center that's like research, technology, worksheets, and they have my teacher's aide will be there to kind of help guide them through these things if they choose them. And then we just let them do a lot of hands-on stuff. So when we were studying speed, acceleration, and velocity, they had toy trains. I brought in train tracks and wooden trains. They had blocks. They had cars. They had a huge rubber racetrack that you can unroll and then prop it over all kinds of furniture to make it go like to have hills and things like that. And so at first we just talked about what are the definitions of these three terms. And then it was like, all right, go play with all these, go play at all the centers, go check out what we've got at all the centers. Now let's come back and say, where did you observe speed? What does that mean? What did it look like? What did you see? What did you notice? Where did you observe velocity? Where would velocity apply? And any of these, where did that definition we talked about, what does that mean when we actually got down and started playing with the cars? What did you see? What does acceleration mean in the context of what you did today? And then we talk about that. And then we set up the next week, we'll do a lot of the same activities, but maybe have more guided things. Like I want you to take data I want you to time how long it took your car to go on the racetrack. Okay, now I want you to fill out this chart and write out down the data. Okay, now we're going to talk about the formula for speed. So now we need to know the distance. Now I want you to measure the distance. Now I want us to do these formulas where we plug in the numbers and we talk about how we come up with speed. So we just started gravity, friction, and air resistance. So we had them doing toy cars on a top, linoleum floor next to doing it on a shag carpet. And we had them, I had one kid who was flipping a water bottle. And I said, I'm going to let you do that if you can relate it to what we're studying today. And he just kind of looked at me and I gave him, we had watched a video where they had a piece of paper balled up in a open piece of paper and they dropped them both. They were talking about how the open piece of paper fell more slowly due to the air resistance. So he kind of looked at me when I said that, and then I gave him a piece of paper. I said, maybe think about a comparison. And then a few minutes later, he comes up and he goes, I was flipping my bottle, so then I tried to flip the paper, but the bottle's faster because it's smaller and it's heavier and the paper's got more surface area, so it was slower, it had more air resistance. And then I said, all right, do you want to share your findings of your experiment here with the class? And he was like, yeah. And it was so funny because he stands up to class, he says, so the teacher said I can flip my water bottle if I relate it to the lesson. And it was just so cute because he was so excited about it that I was able to allow him to flip his water bottle in school and still have it relate to something. He was really proud of that. So yeah, they really get to do a lot of hands-on things. And I'm always asking them, where do you see this? What are you observing? What are you noticing? So it's like they're doing real things that are engaging to them and then applying these types of scientific questions to the things that they already really care about. So it builds on just an inherent level of curiosity and interest that the kids have that is very rewarding. And really the type of classroom that I run now, when I was a teacher, my favorite kids in my preschool classrooms were always the boys that got in trouble all the time. And even when I was like a TA and even when I was a student and I was helping the classrooms, the teachers would always make me deal with those kids. And they would be like, Katie, take him and go in the hallway. Because everybody else would get mad at these kids. They'd get yelled at, they'd get in timeout, they'd get meetings with their parents, and all everybody gets so mad at these kids all the time. I loved those boys, and I would go out and sit with them in the hallway, and I'd be like, what happened? And I would talk it out with them. And Like, I was always trying to work with them. Like, what do you need? What do you want to do? How can we make this, how can we bring you back into the classroom and engage you in a way that you care about? And so my classroom that I have now, my son is one of those boys for sure. That was a big reason. I mean, I was already homeschooling, but my youngest son would have been, I think he would have been harmed by being in the school district. I think he would have been told that he was bad from the time he was very young, and he's not bad. And he was not told that, and he doesn't think of himself that way. And I feel very blessed and very proud that I did that for him. And he's in my class now, and he's 9, and he is constantly so engaged and just building and moving and creating things and talking to people. And it's so fun and so rewarding for me to see that the type of kids that were my favorite kids in the public school system, but that it was always a battle to figure out how to bring them in. And instead, what I was able to do was go create a system for those kids that includes those kids, that really meaningfully brings them into an environment that they care about and that matters to them, and that allows them to be leaders. Those boys are always the leaders. They're always the ones who know how to negotiate, and they know how to talk to people, and they know how to get people on board. And they, when you give them a little bit of space to do that, they blossom into it every time. And that is one of my greatest blessings, is being able to run that type of classroom and to see how engaged they are and how much they love it. And it's very, you know, I inside I feel a little bit smug about it. It's like, yes, I was right. I was right about these boys.
So Katy, so your contention is, if those boys were in the public school system, they probably would have been pegged as disruptive, can't sit still. I'm going to show something, and everyone, I'm going to revisit this in a stream by itself, but I read this earlier, and I think this feeds into what Katy's talking about. I want to acknowledge Salchi for sharing this with me when I started inquiring about this. This is a link about homeschooling. I don't have the title queued up. Actually, the title is Research Facts on Homeschooling. Okay, and this is interesting because you just mentioned this. This subtitle says Gender Differences in Children and Youth Respected ? I'll read both of them. I'll read both. One researcher finds that homeschooling gives young people an unusual chance to ask questions such as, who am I and what do I really want? And through the process of asking such questions and gradually answering the questions, home-educated girls develop the strengths and the resistance abilities to give them an unusually strong sense of self. Some think that boys' energetic natures and tendency to physical expression can more easily be accommodated in home-based education. Many are concerned that a highly disproportionate number of public school special education students are boys, and that boys are 2.5 times as likely as girls in public schools to be diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But you just stated that these guys they have leadership qualities.
Absolutely.
And if those qualities are allowed to flourish, and if they're developed, those turn into strength.
Absolutely. Yes.
Interesting.
That's been noticed in outdoor education as well. I'm not the only person who said that. People who work with kids in the outdoor setting, like outdoor preschool programs and programs that are put together where kids are really out in the forest schools and that sort of approach. People who run those types of programs have said the same thing about the types of boys who would be diagnosed and labeled in a public school are leaders in the forest school.
Okay, I have a question from Ray. Ray, I think we talked about this. He says, how does the education level of a homeschooler impact his or her effectiveness in preparing their students for STEM careers? Have you tracked any of your students to see what they go on to do after you finish with them?
No, this is too new for me to have done that. This is only the second year that I've been running my homeschool program. So they were, these kids are still elementary school age. That would be an interesting question to look at for people who've been looking at the data for longer. It absolutely does impact, but I think the impact largely becomes relevant in situations where the parent needs to access outside resources. That was one of the things that I was talking to a friend of mine about homeschooling. He couldn't wrap his head around the idea that, when he talked about how will you homeschool your own high schoolers, and I was telling him that I would access community resources and that my kids would have other teachers besides only me, and that was something he had a really hard time. He's like, but you're homeschooling. I said, yeah, but you can still sign your kids up for classes. You can still have your kids join things. You can find mentors for your kids. You can find apprenticeships for your kids. So absolutely, your own background is going to influence it. What my kids have seen in terms of entrepreneurship is going to be totally different than what somebody else's kids have seen of entrepreneurships if they don't have parents that are entrepreneurs. If you grow up on a farm, your kids are going to have a totally different situation to learn from than if you grow up and you're an IT professional in a city. So that absolutely plays an impact, but that's where mitigating yourself is the only influence on your children is important. And I think that especially as kids get older, you want to be looking at your community and looking at what opportunities are out there and looking at what connections you can make for your kids.
Okay. I definitely think, well, there's a lot of work now there's a lot of acknowledgement now about boys are being left behind in society in general.
Mm-hmm.
So I think communicating what you just described, seeing it yourself, I think that this needs to get out a little bit more,
mm-hmm.
so that more people hear it. I mean, Richard Reeves has written books about it.
Mm-hmm.
Who else? Richard Reeves. I think he's the main one. Dr. Warren Farrell has written books about this.
Mm-hmm.
Something's happening with the boys.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting swallowed up in this whole thing. So I think that's important, what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read something else, then we'll transition to the end here, because my last question gets to what happens after homeschooling. So this and everyone, I'm going to revisit this link again after this, but this subtitle reads academic performance. I'm going to go to the second and third bullet. It says 78% of peer-reviewed studies on academic achievement show homeschool students perform statistically significantly better than those in institutional schools. Homeschool students score above average on achievement tests, regardless of their parents' level of formal education or their family's household income.
Mm.
I'm not going to read all these because I don't want to bog us down. How do the children transition on from homeschooling? When I think your son is going to a public high school,
mm-hmm.
right? And then they go on to college.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak about the transition from going to that small little tribe out into the
mm-hmm.
world?
Sure. There are a number of ways that kids can transition out of high school. I was happy that my child wanted to go to public school, and I am hoping that my other two will, primarily for the reason that because I live in the city of Syracuse, they have the Say Yes to Education program. And if my kids attend public school in the Syracuse City School District for at least 3 years of high school, they will be able to get free tuition from any number of colleges. As long as they have the grades to be accepted into the college, they can get free tuition. So I really wanted to take advantage of that perk, and I was happy to send my child to public school if he wanted to. I wouldn't push it if they didn't want to, but he wanted to, so that was great. However, there are other ways to do it. One common way is that you as the parent create transcripts for your child. And then when they apply to colleges, they simply use their homeschooling transcripts as opposed to using transcripts provided by a public school. And most colleges and universities are adept at accepting those and have ways of asking for that for parents or providing forms for it or what have you. So it's relatively common. Another thing that they can do is they can take a GED test when they get old enough. Another thing that they can do is they can start to sign up for college level classes when they are still in high school. And I know that the city of Syracuse has at least 2 separate pipelines for homeschooled students to begin to take college level classes. So then by the time that they graduate from their homeschool, by the time they finish 12th grade, they already have several college credits under their belt, and they already have established attendance at a local community college. So that's possible. You can also take CLEP tests. One of my colleagues in running my small business now is preparing her 8th grader to be ready to take the CLEP exams in a variety of subjects over the next several years as she transitions into her high school years, so that by the time she finishes homeschooling high school, she'll already have a lot of college credits through the use of the CLEP. So there are a lot of different pathways to move from homeschooling into college. And it really depends on the student, the parent, and the college or university in question, which one's going to be the best approach for any individual.
Well, it sounds like the city is seeing that this is a real thing, and that there are significant numbers of children who are being homeschooled. So if they're setting up,
I think most of these connections have happened via homeschooling parents who called up colleges and universities and said, hey, we've got a bunch of kids here and they're doing great on their test scores and they want to come to your school. Can we make something happen? So I think that's been largely a grassroots effort by homeschooling parents from what I've observed.
Okay. You know what, Katie, I'm going to read this first bullet because let me see. It says, the home educated typically score 15 to 25 percentile points above public school students on standardized academic achievement tests. Is that something you've observed with your son and other children? Are they just better prepared?
My son started 9th grade, and at the end of 9th grade, he took 2 Regents exams. One of them was a science Regents and one of them was a math Regents. And his teacher called me afterwards and said he scored the highest score of all the 9th graders at that high school on both the science and the math Regents. So I have a suspicion that particular son of mine would have been a really good test taker, whether he went to public school or whether he was homeschooled. But I think that being allowed to spend a lot of time following his interests and doing things that were really engaging for him made him motivated. And when he decided to go to public school, it was his choice to go there. He wasn't forced to go there. And so he was enthusiastic about doing well. He wanted to do well. He wanted to see positive results. So yeah, and my daughter scored really, really well. You don't have to do standardized tests with your homeschoolers until I think it's 4th through 8th grade. You've got to do every other year, and then 9th through 12th every year. So my son took a standardized test in 5th grade, and then he went to public school for 6th, and then he came back home, and they didn't have that requirement during COVID. They waived it. So he didn't have to take another one until high school, and then he did really well. My daughter took one last year, and she did very well. She was in like the 99th percentile for her age group. And my youngest son hasn't taken any yet. He's not of age where he needed to.
Okay, so it sounds like the advantages are that the kids get to follow their interests and follow their talents. And it sounds like for the sciences, you all were really deliberate about giving them something that was thought intensive, curiosity intensive, and also data driven.
Yeah, and things that they really cared about. We did so many kitchen science experiments, even, before I was running my program when we were at home. Anytime we found like a YouTube with a cool science experiment, like put this bar of soap in your microwave and watch it turn into a cloud, we'd be like, all right, let's do it. So we did a ton of hands-on science stuff. I just felt like the theory can come later. If you've had the experience, then the theory makes sense. But if you're memorizing the theory without any experience, then it tends to be forgettable. And then later when the experience comes along, you don't necessarily remember or apply the theory because when at the time that you memorized the theory, it wasn't relevant and it wasn't connected to anything real. So I was big on hands-on things for science. And then we can always apply and talk about and discuss the theories after they've had this really cool experience. And now they're curious. Now they want to know. Now they're asking. now I have to Google it because it's it's hard. I'm like, oh, I don't know. That's a really good question. Let's look that one up. So I was big on hands-on first and then apply the theories afterwards.
Okay. All right, we're down to the last two here. Do you see this trend in homeschooling continuing, or because I'm hearing a lot about teacher burnout at the public school level and just a lot of issues there, kids being sent there for babysitting, and do you see this trend in homeschooling increasing?
I do, but I also see an enormous market for community building within it, because I think that most people, I went into homeschooling because I was a teacher and I actively wanted to be an educator for my own children. I enjoy doing that. It was what I picked as my field. But a lot of people go into homeschooling and they're not teachers, and they don't necessarily love teaching, and they don't necessarily want to be a teacher, but they're not crazy about what's going on in the public schools. So I see, again, putting on my entrepreneur hat here, I see a tremendous market for homeschooling businesses where community can be created and parents can get help, because a lot of parents who homeschool, there are pieces of homeschooling that are overwhelming for them and that they would really like to have more help with from more seasoned educators. And also the community aspect is very, very big, especially as kids get older. It's harder to find community for homeschooled high schoolers than it is to find community for homeschooled kindergartners. So I think that the success of homeschooling is going to be tied to the ability of creative people to create market opportunities that will bring people together in communities and give assistance to parents in that regard.
Okay, so those, okay, when you say community, is that not achievable in the public side, or is it something different?
That's a good question, because public schools, I don't want to be overly negative here.
I'll be honest.
The first thing that comes to my mind is the public schools have failed at that. I think people look to public schools for community, and maybe in the suburbs, in wealthier suburbs with well-funded schools that are not dealing with a lot of chronic issues, maybe those schools do provide a sense of community for those regional, for those groups. I don't see it in the inner city. I don't see public schools as places of community. I really don't.
So when you say that, the context in which you're saying that is something beyond going there and learning your lessons and then going home. Yes?
Right. A sense of cohesion, a sense of shared meaning. There was something I read years and years ago, and it was about public schools. And there were 4 authors that they interviewed and said, what would you do to change the trajectory of public schools? And I think that the people were they were big thinkers, but not in the field of education. I wish I could remember who. I think one was an author. One might have been like a religious guy. They were famous people and they were well known, but they were asked this question about what would you do to change the trajectory of public schools? And one guy said something that really struck me as important. And this was a long time ago. I think I was like a teenager when I read this. But what he said is, we need a story that brings people together that we all care about, so that there is a sense of a shared mission. He said, we don't have that in public schools. We don't have a story about a shared mission that people believe in. And I would go further and say that maybe not then, but definitely now, I think the stories that we believed in as Americans are falling apart left and right. They've just been decimated. We don't have that shared sense of mission, even as Americans. And we certainly don't have it in our public schools.
Okay. Well, I mean, arguably, wasn't that one of the places where we got those shared stories and visions and missions
Right.
with public school?
Yeah, that was supposed to be part of it for sure.
Okay. I didn't think about that, but
It was supposed to be like the great leveler, education as the great leveler, bringing together these different strata of society and bringing people together. But then the way that they fund it preserves some of those inequities, and you see the same stratifications in the public schools that you see in the economy.
Okay. Are you familiar? I'm sure you are with Dr. Jonathan Kozol's work.
Yes, he was one of the people. It was funny when I went away to college, and I started reading Jonathan Kozol. They were describing the rich schools and the poor schools, and I remember everybody in my education classes was really shocked by the descriptions of the poor schools. You know, the fact that they had garbage cans to catch the rain, the fact that they had metal detectors, all of these things. It was like, oh my gosh, I find this unreal. And I remember I was like, oh, I already knew about all that stuff, but it's amazing to me. The rich schools, the descriptions of the rich schools was what was really throwing me. I was like, they've got Olympic sized tennis courts, they've got like giant swimming pools, like wow. So that was really eye-opening to me, that what I had considered to be normal was in fact not necessarily normal to people who were middle class.
Yeah. Well, Western New York was like that. Well, I was in the Buffalo Public Schools. I was in one of the better ones. I was at Hutch Tech, but even then, going to basketball games out in Lancaster and Williamsville and Amherst, you could see it. It's like, wow, they have all this stuff, and we have our one building with a half gym and a half swimming pool, and it's old.
Yeah, I remember there were times I couldn't get to my locker to get my things because if it was raining, the roof was leaking, and there would be a giant garbage can blocking my locker to catch the rain.
Wow, at Niagara Falls High School?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, Katy, so really quickly, what do you see? You know, you're a former educator yourself. You're hearing all these stories about teacher attrition and how difficult it is now. What do you see as the future of the public school system? Do you and your peers ever talk about that?
Not too much. And I think that I almost see it as this elephant, this behemoth that is just going to kind of continue to drag along doing largely the same stuff. I don't see a renaissance of public education, and I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong, but I don't see it. And that was one reason why I left and why I don't think I'll ever go back, is because I would have spent the rest of my life compromising and selling out my own vision for meeting them where they were, meeting the system where it was. And my vision is so compelling to me and so motivating to me, and I'm so passionate about it. And it brings me such great joy to create a vision and then bring it into being, that I don't see myself ever being able to go back to the public education system, because I just don't see that ability for that sort of change to happen there.
So what you're saying is you don't see your ability as a teacher to use your creativity,
right,
to do what's best for the students,
right,
because everything is being dictated by the district and the system and the bureaucracy.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. And everything is geared towards test scores. Yes.
Yes, and towards like sitting still. There's just not, I mean, they've got enough money. They could buy hands-on materials. They could design the classrooms in different ways, but they're also really enthralled with technology. And I'm not anti-technology. I do utilize some technology in my classroom, but they want to standardize everything, and they want to monitor everything, and everything becomes a data point. And I think that when you start to look at the public education system as a collection of aggregate data, you lose the respect for the individuals and the children who are there, and you kind of lose the forest for the trees. And so that's one thing I do see increasing in the public schools in the future, is this tendency towards constant monitoring of everything that the kids do, constant data taking about the kids, and the reduction of human beings to data point systems, data points in an aggregate system where they're looking at the whole and forgetting about the individuals. And so that's something I don't really want to have anything to do with.
Okay. Well, Katy, I'm gonna wind this down. Do you have anything else you want to say to while you're on stage?
No, thank you for having me. And if you got anybody in your audience that's got questions about homeschooling, or is curious or wants to know more, I would be happy to hear from them, or to reach out to them or make connections there.
Where can people find you?
I suppose I could just give my email, which is katyabigailbarrett@gmail.com. KATYABIGAILBARRETT@gmail.com. And so if they send me a message and say they heard me here, I would be happy to make connections with people who are interested in or have questions about homeschooling.
Okay. Let me ask you one other question, because my father was an educator out in the Capital District, Schenectady, Albany, Troy. And he was in the Schenectady School District. And so I saw some things when I stayed with him for 2 years before I moved here to Washington, D.C. Let's see. Professional development as homeschoolers, do you all have to learn something every year, or it's all personal and just no?
Yeah, no, you don't have the homeschooling laws are different in each state. But in New York State, simply being the parent of your child is sufficient qualification for being a homeschooler, and you're not required to do any sort of further education. Some people don't know that. They think they have to be a teacher to be a homeschooler, but you don't.
Okay. All right, everyone. That's it. That's all I've got tonight. I think I think we're done. It's about 9 o'clock now. Oh, it's 9:15. All right. Well, Katy, thank you for coming on and talking about this. This is an important topic, and yeah, I think it's something that's important for everyone to keep their eyes on. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Okay, just hang on for 1 second. Everyone, I'm going to wind the stream down. If you're new to the channel, please like, share, and subscribe. If you want to donate something, my Cash App and PayPal are below in the description box. You can leave a super thanks as well. I'm not going to go over my newsletter tonight. The link is there in the description box as well. So I will do a follow-up. Salchi's there in the chat. I'm going to go over this link that he shared. I went over it a little bit during my talk with Katy, but I'm going to go over it in its entirety in the aftermath of this one. So look out for that. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your night. As always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Always try to do your best. Take care, and I will talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.